Hi, this is Charlie Bros with Disability Landscape. Today I'm here with Tricia Carlberg, and we're interviewing some wonderful folks from the Guthrie Theater. We're excited to have them here today. We have Joseph Haj, the artistic director, and Hunter Gullickson, who is the accessibility manager. Tricia, why don't you take it away?
Great. Yes, we wanted to invite Joseph Haj today because we knew that he directed The Glass Menagerie, and this was a play that had a lead actor who had a role who was written in the script as someone with a disability. And so we just wanted to talk about some accessibility that the Guthrie offers. So, Joseph, if you could go ahead and tell us a little bit about Corey's role in the play and how the Guthrie allowed for some accommodations.
Yes, so when the Guthrie produced The Glass Menagerie, the character of Laura Winfield is described, albeit vaguely, in the script. She refers to herself as being crippled. It's very clear that within the family she is thought about and cared for in a certain way that suggests a physical disability, although it's never narrowly characterized in the play what that physical disability is. So when it came time to cast the role, we thought it very important to seek an actor with physical disability for it. And Carrie Cox auditioned and was thrilling in the role. Coincidentally, I suppose, she was in my former job. I was the artistic director of Playmakers Repertory Company, which worked closely with a graduate acting program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I had recruited Carrie to that program and took her through training for 3 years. So many years later, to come back to her and have her come to the Guthrie, the theater I now lead, playing the role of Laura was a great thrill because she's a magnificent actor.
Yes, and you mentioned too that there are some tunnels that allow the actors to do some dress rehearsals, and those dress rehearsal rooms are one floor below, but Carrie was allowed to use an off stage room that was more allowing for some accommodation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it of course, knowing that Carrie was in the play, it influenced the scenic design. We wanted to make sure that it was a set that Carrie could comfortably navigate. And as you say, our dressing rooms, the vast majority of our dressing rooms are below stage level. And so our crew fit out a bit of a dressing room, dressing area for Carrie immediately off stage of Glass Menagerie in the wings, allowing her accommodation. She has a couple of moments in the play where we wouldn't talk about it as not as a quick change, not like something that had to happen in 30 seconds, but something that just allowed her to continue to keep her focus in the play and set up her changing room and dressing area in a way that it didn't negatively impact her ability to focus on the play at hand. And so we were pleased to be able to offer that accommodation to help Carrie be maximally successful in the play.
Yes, that's really a wonderful thing to offer. We'll also be interviewing Reagan Linden later on next week, and she was also a lead role as Laura in college in the same play, and she talked briefly about how she had to be carried onto the stage, and there were moments where she had to dance with another actor and they just lifted her up. And so there's just a lot of things that the different theaters can offer, I guess.
Yeah, it's long past time for all of us as theater makers to have a much broader idea about who is allowed to participate in our work and in what ways. And so it's always thrilling when you see a creative team. Charlie, in an earlier call, we had talked a little bit about Ali Stoker in Oklahoma and how thrilling that was to see. It's a song and dance part. We're used to seeing a kind of actor in that role, and to see it done another way, and with an actor who was wholly convincing in the role. There's an actor in a chair who was wholly convincing in a role, was just such a thrill. And I think, you know, the more we as theater makers see other theater makers doing that, the more our own imagination broadens about how to be what we all seek to be, right? Which is maximally inclusive in the work that we do.
Right. And in Allie's case, I mean, she created a role so impressive that she won the Tony for it, which is barrier breaking for persons with disabilities. And, you know, she's applauded for it. But, you know, there are plenty of actors already in the theater and, you know, in screen that are people with disabilities. And, you know, it's great to see them, you know, making more headway and being more active in the scene.
Agreed. Agreed.
So, and we spoke yesterday, Joseph. You said when you're casting someone for a play, you know, color, race, none of that matters if they fit the role that you want them, unless it specifically calls for it. And, you know, I think that's such a broad part of the stage, is because it allows the patron to use their imagination, to fully immerse themselves in whomever is playing that role. And we spoke yesterday with about Hamilton doing that, where you had, you know, a largely African American and Hispanic um, crew and, you know, cast that took on, you know, the roles of founding fathers.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's not that it doesn't matter, if I can reframe that a little bit,
Okay.
because you know, anybody who's on stage looks the way they look and presents the way they present. So you can end up telling stories you don't want to tell if you cast in a certain way. Who's the villain? Who's the hero? What's their
Sure.
skin color? So one has to be very thoughtful about it. But you know, as it relates to race and as it relates to gender, there's so many characters in plays where it just doesn't, you know, there's a DJ who, there's somebody who runs a radio show, whatever. That could be anybody, male, female, or whatever person of color. That could be anybody.
Absolutely.
So right. I would say it's thoughtful, and you have to be, again, very careful that you're not telling stories you don't intend to tell by casting in a certain way, or so where you can lose the shape of the storytelling. But having the broadest idea about having an idea about the story you want to tell, and then having the broadest idea about who can be included in the telling of this story, and through whose lens do we get to view this story amongst the practicing artists. And that doesn't just have to be the actors on the stage. We're about directors and choreographers and scenic designers and costume designers and lighting designers.
Mhm.
And it has been my experience over and over and over again, that the more varied the points of view we get on stage, people coming from different racial and cultural background, different abilities, is good for the work. The outcomes are better. They just are,
Yeah.
than having all the people who are all the same, homogenized, they've trained the same way, eaten the same foods, basically grown up in the same families. That's not as good for making plays as having a sort of plurality of views and positions. So
Exactly.
that's how we think about it a lot at the Guthrie.
Okay. Um, and, you know, we've been focusing a lot on, you know, who's on the stage, but those in the background, writers and, you know, stage hands, things like that, set decorators, all that type of thing. Um, you know, there's a place for people of all styles, you know, including persons with disabilities. Um, you know, I personally can't think of a playwright as a person with disability, but I'm sure that they do exist.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they can also craft their story to present it to the world.
Sure.
Maybe this too would be a good question for Hunter. If you could comment briefly about any other actors or stagehands that come to mind that had some accessibility when they came on to the Guthrie.
Yeah, absolutely. And this makes me think just real quickly that there's the idea that when you talk about seeing somebody on stage, there's just the validity then of seeing yourself, and it really is reflecting what the world is like out there. And there are so many different types of jobs within our organization and arts organizations in general where people with disabilities can and should be working. I think about the show Tribes we did. I think it was probably 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And that show had was written about a deaf character. And that character was raised to read lips. He didn't know deaf culture, didn't know anything about sign language. It was a very isolated upbringing until later, once he was an adult. He met a coda, a child of deaf adults, and was then able to learn about this whole culture that he never knew about. Interestingly, the deaf actor that we brought in for that show, John McGinty, he played that role a few other places after the Guthrie, but then went and was in The Hunchback. So he was a deaf actor in Hunchback of Notre Dame, which also set a new trend that since then there have been a handful, there have been several deaf actors who have now gone on and played that role as well. So I think that's a fun little tie when I think about that show and then the specific actor and what that has opened up since then.
That's really fascinating. And is it befitting the role? That's a big question. I mean, can the Hunchback be portrayed as a deaf person? You know, is that a known fact about the character? Joseph,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we understand in Hunchback that that role, uh, you know, is a disabled actor. I think the opportunity to put, and of course, I think traditionally has been cast with an able-bodied person
sure.
playing the role of. And again, I think I think I think we're getting better. I think the needle is moving on these questions, and I think we understand when there's a character that is written with a disability, our expectation is that it will be an actor with a disability playing said role. I think it's a greater expectation in the field today than it's ever been. I hear that conversation a lot in the film community and film and TV community as well. Um, Carrie Cox would talk a lot about cripping up, getting able actors to play the role of disabled folks over and over again, and folks are done with it. They're done with it. We want it to be different, and so I think you'll see continued movement in the field in this regard, which is good for everyone.
Well, and for a number of us people in the disabled community, when we see characters on television who are portrayed as disabled, but they're not, it's a little frustrating because couldn't the part be filled by a person with a disability?
That's right. That's right. And when we see people with disability thrive in those roles, as again you described with Ali Stoker and others, it's
Mhm.
just it deepens our understanding. It helps us. I think I shared with you, Charlie. I grew up with a father who was blind, and watching him navigate a world that continually diminished his abilities just by virtue of his blindness over and over again. I watched that. I grew up watching. That, and so every time we see someone from the disabled community participate and thrive in these ways you're describing and Hunter's describing, it's good for all of us. It's just good for all of us, and it helps us broaden our own notions of what disability actually means.
Yeah, it's I should say, can say, a cultural growth, if
Mm-hmm.
you will.
Yes.
And Trish, you seem to have a question.
Yeah, this is a little bit more for Hunter, just because we spoke a little bit with Joe about some of the accessibility. Is the Guthrie ahead of other theaters nationally when it comes to accessibility? Someone mentioned that we have braille machines at the Guthrie and other accommodations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Well, I will say, let me turn this to Hunter, but let me tee him up here to say, I came from a much smaller theater. I came from Playmakers Repertory Company on the campus of UNC in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I'd love to take credit for much of the accessibility stuff that we do, but it far predates me. Some of our programs go back 40 plus years. Hunter can talk about it. Uh, we have some of the best programs in the country when it comes to accessibility, and it has much to do with Hunter's genius, and it has much to do with the Guthrie's straight up commitment in these spaces for a long, long, long time, always conscious that we're not doing enough, we can do more and we can do better. And as the Guthrie has learned more, how we have done better as we have known better has been such a thrill. Hunter, I'd love if you would share some of the stuff that the Guthrie does and that you lead so beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point is spot on. That, I mean, it certainly predates both of us, and it really is tied into some organizational values for such a long time. You know, I've done a little bit of research on what our history is, and was able to find that our first ASL interpreter performance was in 1979. And I know that there are other things that were happening before then. And so, to have that buy-in early really led to a lot of self-examination. And I think that's the goal that we continue. Not only what do we have going, but is it of a high quality? Is it still meeting the needs of patrons today? What changes do we need to make? How do we improve it? Because we should always be looking to improve something and not be static. Really don't want to have a static program that meets something, meets a checkbox, and then we move on to something else. We have to keep that growth always going. And so part of that is those organizational values. Part of that is how we interact with our communities. How do we get feedback and actually listen to it, and then use that productively from there. So ASL, American Sign Language, started that very early. We're also early adopters with audio description, which is a program for people who are blind or have low vision. You get live description during performances, and that was in 2002 that we started that. There was Margaret and Cody from Washington D.C., the Miracle Eye. Sorry, the name's not coming to me right now. They provided the training across the country, and so we had that. And with that program, we also provide sensory tours. It's an opportunity for people to come before the show on a Saturday matinee to come and see and feel what the stage and set and show really is. So you can touch costumes, you can touch props, you can smell them, you can walk on stage and get the sense of the scale and the scope of what's really going to be happening once the show takes place. And yes, we offer Braille programs. We actually own a Braille embosser. So we make our own materials on site now. And we also, part of what we do, we have knowledge. We've built it up over a long time, but we don't want to keep that just for us. Part of what we really want to do is to share what we have, our knowledge, our equipment, our abilities. So we also make Braille and large print materials for other arts organizations across the region. We have equipment that we loan out, audio description equipment, captioning equipment, things like that. So to make our resources available for the community as well, I think is a really important thing that we're trying to do.
Hunter, it was also made mention that you have the open caption device as well for certain performances, and that's a for persons even like myself who are just slightly hearing impaired, it makes the program more enjoyable for us in case we can't hear the dialogue completely, you know?
That's exactly it. Yeah, captioning, we've been doing that for a while. And there are so many people that can benefit from captioning. Even regardless if you have hearing loss or not. If you think about attending, a show that has an accent that may be difficult to understand, or really understanding what's happening during a Shakespeare play, to be able to read it and have that visual, the visual text to go along with what's happening on stage. Think about people who use English as not their primary language. Having the words is another way to make that more accessible to people. And then, yeah, if you just need to catch a word here and there, it's helps so many people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think about, and even where we are right now and where we're going, is just how many performances are we offering and how do we do that? So one of the things is we offer 4 scheduled performances that are captioning, but we also offer that on request as well. So if anyone can't attend those specific performances, you know what, let's find a date that does work and we'll add it. We've got a number of different devices that we can use that really make it flexible.
Okay. And then the one other thing we wanted to kind of touch on, when the relaxed performances, the sensory safe, I guess, for those with autism and other issues such as that. If you can touch on those a little bit, please.
Yeah, it's a really great program. So the intention is to relax the environment, relax the rules, and allow people to come to a show and really and truly honestly be themselves as they are, who they are, and we kind of meet each other together. So some of the things we do are really about what that environment looks like. I think sometimes there's a stigma of walking into a theater of you have to sit in your seat, you have to be quiet, you can't move, you can't get up, and there's really stringent rules. And it's really a way for us to say, you know what, that's not what we're really about. It's about a shared experience. And so that's one of the things we do with our relaxed performances. Some of the house rules are changed. So if you need to get up and walk around, we leave space open so that you can do that. If you need to have fidgets or other manipulatives just to make that experience possible for you, then you can do that. You can bring devices in. We look at the environment of the show itself. So we'll put a cap on the overall sound limit. It doesn't go above 90 decibels. Then we look at each of the light cues. What does the transition look like? If there's strobes in there, we pull them out. If there's any sudden impacts, we look at all of that, just because we know that sensory impact can really affect people. And then kind of the third thing we do, so we look at the environment in the house, we look at the show itself, and then the third item is really about preparing people. So we put a lot of time into materials so that people can really understand what that experience is like, not only inside the building, but getting to the building. Because we know a couple things. We know that it's tough there's a lot of people that want to come to the theater and they probably haven't been there before. So there's information that needs to get out of what the experience is like and really what we're doing to show that it really is a welcoming environment. But then also we know that that there are some people that just need to have their eyes on something to understand what they're really doing before they do that experience. And part of that is a trust issue. So that, they can see that we really are invested in this program. We really are invested in them as people, and showing what we're doing to make that experience welcome.
That is great. And Joseph, if I might, in terms of the performers, the actors during a relaxed performance, Is there a difference in way they handle the performance and how they go about doing those particular shows?
It's a great question. It changes absolutely and fundamentally what they're accustomed to with a darkened house where audience can see actors. Actors really don't, you know the audience is there, you're hearing them, you're responding to them, but you don't really see them the way you do in a relaxed performance where the house lights are up. So the actors and audience are really in a shared space. Many folks in the relaxed performance, they'll make sound. Again, we're not policing that. You know, there's a kind of response. There are things that are happening in the auditorium that actors can see an audience member getting up and moving about or rocking or making sounds, etc. And so it requires a particular concentration on the actor's part and a kind of breathing and absorption that allows that this is going to happen a different way. And the most thrilling part about that is very demanding for the actors to concentrate on the task at hand of delivering the story in an environment that's very different than what they've been rehearsed in and what they're playing on a night-by-night basis. And it's thrilling that it's also, for many actors, the most meaningful performances they get to do are those relaxed performances. You know, they feel themselves in closer and more immediate connection to audience than they ever do in our traditional way of making theater. So, you know, the beauty is it does a lot of good things in all directions, not least of all is it makes artists bigger humans as well, and that's beautiful.
That is great. I think we're almost out of time. So I really want to thank both Hunter Gullickson and Joseph Haj for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation about the Guthrie Theater, which is a Minnesota institution. Been around, how long has the Guthrie been?
Since 1963.
Well, it's been around as long as I have. So,
so it's a great place. I've been there a few times. I have unfortunately not been to the new theater yet. And
you guys have been there a while, so I'm going to make it a point to get there and enjoy all the accommodations you people have. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with Tricia Karlberg. My name is Charlie Brose, and this has been Disability Landscape.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.